So, well, I do appreciate your time and make sure this is running. So, so you are a longtime advocate for sprinklers. I know you worked for commercial sprinklers for a long time, and now the focus is in residential.
That's right.
I'm just wondering, from your perspective, why you're so personally interested in this for yourself and for the constituents that you serve?
Well, I first became involved with this issue back in the year 2000. It's quite a while now, because there was a very tragic fire in the city I represent, Newton, Massachusetts, and we lost 5 people died that day in a fire in a large commercial building. And the next day, I actually read in the paper there was some reference to loopholes in the law and the building code, something. And I was a newly elected legislator, and I thought, loopholes in the law, you know, what's this? Because, you know, we're sort of reeling from the tragedy. And I called our fire chief eventually. He told me to call the state fire marshal, and who started to educate me about the laws in Massachusetts and the codes, and also about sprinklers. And he taught me a statistic and a phrase that I've used repeatedly since then, which is that there had never been an instance of multiple fatality from fire in a building with an automatic sprinkler system in it. And so to me, it was a no-brainer that, you know, if we make any sense out of tragedy, it's to prevent future tragedies. And so I began working with the state fire marshal and the fire chiefs of Massachusetts, as well as the professional firefighters of Massachusetts, on legislation that would close some of those loopholes in actually non-residential buildings. And it took us 8 years, but we kept coming back term after term, and eventually we got the bill passed and signed into law. And it's really one of my proudest accomplishments. I feel I had a role in saving lives, and there's nothing more important anyone can do. And so you never can, you know, rest on your laurels very long. So the fire chiefs came back to me a few years later and said, well, you know, we had that victory. It's really time for this next big challenge in Massachusetts, because most of the buildings now are subject to requirements, but the new frontier, so to speak, is in residential. And once again, they began to educate me on, you know, the number of deaths from home fires. So I was honored to be asked to file the legislation, and we're going to work really hard this session to see if we can get it passed. And if we don't get it passed, we'll file again and file again until we do.
So in this education, as we come up to speed on the ups and downs that Massachusetts has had with residential fire sprinklers efforts, what's your perspective on the biggest challenge that we face, and how do we get over that challenge?
The biggest challenge has to do with the economy. The legislature is very sensitive to the fact that we have a struggling economy, and they are very hesitant to require anything of business. I mean, you run into it not just on fire issues, but on a lot of issues. There's always a worry about cost, you know, and the only thing I always say is, you know, how do you put a price tag on a human life? But the challenge is there. It is very tough. There will be business opposition, strong opposition, I am sure, and it'll be tough to overcome that, but we'll try. Historically, most legislation in Massachusetts on fire safety seems to have passed in the wake of tragedies. Now, with homes, there are these tragedies consistently. You know, we'll just have to bring that to people's awareness.
And what advice would you offer to other states or other coalitions who are working to make this happen in their regions?
Well, one is to build a coalition. It really was important to have the firefighters and the fire chiefs and the fire marshals, you know, and the sprinkler, you know, everyone working together, the unions, you know, you know, elected representatives respond to constituencies. That's, you know, I always say to my constituents, they're my employer, they hire and fire me. So the more voices there are working together, the more powerful it is, and eventually the more successful the effort can be. But the other thing, which was very important in our success in 2008, had to do with the media involvement. A local media channel, the New England Cable News Channel, produced a documentary on that fire. And it was a very powerful, they had just done that independently, and when working on the fire, they actually discovered my bill, and they highlighted it a bit in the documentary, but they walked around the building with it was videotapes then, of that documentary, and handed it to legislators, and they handed it to the chairman of Ways and Means, and they handed it to the Speaker of the House and the governor, and it was very powerful. And so my advice to coalitions is get the media involved.
Great. Is there anything else that we haven't covered you think is an important point that we should talk about today, or anything you want to mention that we haven't?
I think it's important for people to never give up. I mean, we're blessed to live in a democratic system, and eventually, when you're on the right side and if you build your forces, you can win. And so I just encourage people to hang in there and keep working on it.
That's awesome.